She's too broken to be loved. The rain had been falling since morning, but nobody in the great hall of Ashfall Castle cared about the weather. Inside, the fires were burning bright, the tables were full of food, and the nobles were laughing the kind of laugh that comes from wine, not joy. Elira stood near the back wall holding a silver tray with 6 wine glasses on it. She was not a noble. She was not even a proper servant. She was the daughter of Lady Vantine, one of the richest women in the kingdom, and yet here she was, carrying drinks like a maid, because her mother liked to remind her of her place. Elira had stopped asking why a long time ago. She was 22 years old, tall, thin in the way that comes from skipping meals rather than choosing to be slim, with dark hair pulled back so tight it made her scalp ache. Her eyes were pale gray, the color of a sky before a storm, and most people said they looked empty. They were not empty. They were just tired of showing feelings to people who used them as weapons. Her mother, Lady Vantine, sat near the head table, laughing with the other nobles, her jewelry catching the firelight every time she moved her hands. She was beautiful in the practiced way rich women often are, every hair in place, every smile chosen carefully. But there was something cold behind her eyes, something that had never once looked at her daughter with real warmth. Tonight there was a special guest. Chaol Draven, the Alpha King of the Ashfall Pack, had come to attend the winter gathering, a tradition where nobles from every corner of the kingdom met to share food, make alliances, and gossip about anyone who wasn't in the room. Kings did not usually attend these small local gatherings, but Chaol was known for doing things differently than the kings before him. He believed in seeing his people directly, not just hearing reports about them. He sat at the head table, tall even while sitting, with broad shoulders and dark hair that fell slightly over his forehead. His eyes were a deep amber color, the kind of eyes that seemed to see straight through pretending. He wasn't loud. He wasn't the kind of man who needed to raise his voice to be heard. When Chaol spoke, people listened, not because he was king, but because something about him demanded attention the way thunder demands attention before it even arrives. Elira had noticed him the moment he walked in, the way everyone did, but she had quickly looked away. Noticing someone like him was dangerous. Men like that did not end up with women like her. She had learned that lesson already, more than once, in ways that still made her chest tighten if she let herself remember. She kept her eyes down and focused on her job. 6 wine glasses. She counted them again and again, the way she always did when the room got too loud, too much, too full of eyes that might land on her. Then her mother's voice rose above the noise. "She's too broken to be loved," Lady Vantine said, loud enough for the tables near her to hear. She wasn't talking to anyone directly. She was talking about Elira, to the ladies sitting beside her, as if her daughter wasn't standing 20 feet away holding a tray of wine glasses. The words moved through the hall like smoke, slow, but impossible to ignore once you noticed them. "Any man who takes her, takes broken goods," her mother continued, sipping her wine like she'd said nothing more serious than a comment on the weather. "I've told her 100 times. No one wants a girl who flinches at every touch, who can't even look a man in the eye without shaking. She ruined herself, long before she ruined any hope of a good marriage." A few of the nobles nearby laughed quietly. Not everyone, but enough. Elira did not drop the tray. She wanted to. Some tired, furious part of her wanted to let all 6 glasses shatter across the stone floor, just so the sound could interrupt her mother's voice. But she didn't. She stood there, and she counted the glasses again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Because counting was the only thing that kept her upright when the room felt like it was closing in. She had heard worse from her mother before. She had heard worse in private, where no one else could see the way the words landed. But hearing it here, in front of 200 people, in front of a king, was a new kind of pain, one that made her ears ring and her hands go cold. She told herself it didn't matter. She told herself this was just another Tuesday of being her mother's daughter. She told herself a lot of things that didn't help even a little. Then the air in the room changed. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic in the way lightning is dramatic. It was more like the whole room suddenly noticed it had been holding its breath, and now it had a reason to let that breath go. Chairs scraped against the stone floor as several people stood without meaning to, some old instinct in their bodies reacting before their minds understood why. Cale Draven had risen from his seat. He was not smiling. He was not frowning either. His face had the calm, focused look of a man who had just decided something important, something he would not be talked out of. "She's mine," he said. 2 words. That was all. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The whole hall had gone quiet enough that even a whisper would have carried, but he didn't whisper either. He simply said it, plainly, the way a person states a fact everyone should already know. For a moment, nobody moved. Lady Vantian blinked, her wine glass frozen halfway to her lips. Then she laughed, the same practiced, brittle laugh she always used when she felt caught off guard and didn't want anyone to notice. "Your Majesty is very generous," she said, her voice sweet on the surface, sharp underneath. "But you don't know the girl. She's difficult. She's damaged. She's not fit to be near a man like yourself, let alone—" "I didn't ask you to explain her to me," Cale said. His eyes had not moved from Elira since he stood up. "I know exactly what I saw tonight. A woman who stood in a room full of people who were supposed to love her, and instead of breaking, she counted glasses. She held herself together while the person who should have protected her tore her apart in public. That's not broken. That's survival. And I don't take kindly to people insulting survival in my presence." The room was silent enough that Elira could hear her own heartbeat. She stared at him. Her fingers were still wrapped tightly around the edges of the tray, knuckles pale, the glasses trembling slightly from the small shake in her hands that she couldn't fully control. She didn't know what to do with the attention. She had spent years learning how to disappear in rooms exactly like this one, and now the most powerful man in the kingdom had just made that impossible. Her mother's face had gone through several expressions in only a few seconds: confusion, embarrassment, calculation, and finally, something that almost looked like fear. Because in this world, when an alpha king claimed a woman in front of witnesses, it was not something that could simply be taken back. It was not a joke. It was not a passing comment. It was a declaration that carried weight in blood and law. "You don't mean this," Lady Vantian said quietly, all the honey gone from her voice now. "You barely know her." "I know enough," Cale said. Then he turned to look at the rest of the hall, at the nobles who had laughed only minutes before, and something in his gaze made every one of them look away. "I know that whoever mocks her from this night forward answers to me." Nobody said a word. Elira felt the tray shift in her hands and realized she was shaking harder now, though not from fear exactly. It was something else, something she didn't have a name for yet, something that felt too big for her chest to hold. She turned before anyone could see her face crumble and walked quickly toward the kitchen, the tray still in her hands, her mind spinning faster than she could control. Behind her, she heard the murmurs start again, quieter this time, careful, because nobody wanted to be caught saying the wrong thing near the king anymore. In the kitchen, alone, she set the tray down on the counter with hands that would not stop trembling. 4 of the 6 glasses tipped and fell, shattering against the stone floor. She stared at the broken glass for a long moment, breathing hard, waiting for the tears to come. They didn't come. She had used up her tears on her mother a long time ago. What came instead was something quieter, something that felt almost like disbelief, a small stubborn spark buried so deep she had almost forgotten it existed. Someone had spoken up for her. In front of everyone, a king had looked at the worst moment of her life and called it strength instead of shame. She didn't know what to do with that. She swept up the broken glass with shaking hands, careful not to cut herself, and told herself it meant nothing. Kings said dramatic things sometimes. Maybe he felt sorry for her. Maybe he simply enjoyed making a scene. Maybe tomorrow he would forget she existed, and she would go back to being the broken daughter nobody wanted, exactly as her mother always said. She almost believed it. Almost. An hour later, when the gathering had quieted, and most of the guests had wandered off to their rooms or continued drinking near the fire, Elira slipped away to the east balcony, a place she had discovered years ago during another one of these gatherings, back when she was young enough to still hope her mother might change. The balcony overlooked the dark hills beyond the castle, and the torches along the walls barely reached this far, leaving most of it in a soft, forgiving shadow. She liked the shadow. It didn't ask her to explain her face. She didn't hear him approach at first, not until his voice broke the quiet. "You didn't come back into the hall." She turned quickly, startled, though something in her had almost expected this. Cale stood a few steps away, his hands loosely at his sides, his expression calm in a way that made the earlier scene in the hall feel like it belonged to someone else entirely. "I dropped the tray in the kitchen instead," she said, surprising herself with how steady her voice came out. Seemed more private than doing it in front of everyone. "How many glasses survived?" 2 out of 6. "That's an improvement," he said. "I assumed you'd lose all of them." "I have a system," she said. "Focus on the thing that isn't the disaster happening around you." Something flickered across his face, not quite a smile, but close. "Does it work?" "Sometimes." She looked away from him, back toward the dark hills. "Not tonight." He was quiet for a moment, letting the silence stretch instead of rushing to fill it, which she appreciated more than she expected to. Most people filled silence with nervous chatter, especially around her, especially after moments like the one in the hall. He didn't. "Why did you say that?" she finally asked. Not why me. She wasn't ready to ask that question yet. Just why? Why speak up? Why bother? Cale took a slow step closer, though he kept enough distance that she didn't feel trapped, which she noticed, and noticed that she noticed. "Because your mother said the word broken like it was a verdict, like it decided something permanent about who you are. I've known men who called themselves whole their entire lives, and they were the ones who fell apart first the moment something difficult happened. The ones who know exactly where their cracks are, the ones who've survived enough to count wine glasses instead of screaming. Those are the strongest people I've ever met." "That's not an answer to why you said it in front of the entire hall." "No," he agreed. "The answer to that is simpler. I watched you stand there and take it. I watched 200 people say nothing while your own mother humiliated you, and I decided I wasn't going to be the 201st person who stayed silent." Something in Elira's chest cracked open, quiet, and sudden, like a window left open too long finally giving in to the wind. She didn't cry. She had promised herself years ago that her mother didn't get her tears anymore, not even indirectly, not even through the kindness of a stranger. Instead, something hotter rose up in her chest, familiar and almost comforting in its familiarity. Anger. "I don't need you to fix what she said about me," Elira said, her voice sharper now, the old armor sliding back into place easily, the way it always did whenever things got too soft, too honest, too close to something she wasn't ready to feel. "I'm not trying to fix anything," Cale said, his voice steady, unbothered by her sudden edge. "I'm telling the room who she isn't. Whatever you are, whatever you decide you are, that's yours to figure out on your own time. I'm just done watching people vote on it, without you even being asked." She stared at him, breathing harder than she meant to, waiting for him to flinch, to soften his words, to explain himself into something smaller and safer. He didn't. He just stood there, steady, patient, letting his words sit exactly where he'd placed them. "You don't know me," she said quietly. "No," he agreed. "But I'd like to." The words landed differently than she expected. Not sweet, not smooth like the empty compliments men sometimes tried on her before realizing she wasn't worth the effort in their eyes. Just honest, simple, almost too simple for how much weight they carried. She didn't answer right away. She looked out over the dark hills instead, giving herself a moment to breathe, to remember how to exist in a world that had just shifted slightly beneath her feet. "Ashfall," she said finally, testing the shape of the word in her mouth like she was trying on a coat that didn't quite fit yet. "Long way from broken. Longest walk there is," he said. Then he held out his hand, palm open, no pressure in the gesture, no demand, just an offer, one she could take or refuse. "But you don't have to walk it alone unless you want to." She looked at his hand for a long moment. She didn't take it, not yet, but she didn't step back either. The next morning, the entire castle was talking about what had happened in the hall. Servants whispered about it in the kitchens. Nobles whispered about it over breakfast. Even the guards standing at their posts exchanged glances whenever Elira walked past, though none of them said anything directly to her face, not anymore. Word had already spread fast that the Alpha King had claimed her, and in this world, that word carried more protection than any guard ever could. Her mother did not speak to her that morning. Lady Vantian sat at the breakfast table with her usual composed expression, but Elira noticed the tightness around her mouth, the way her hand gripped her teacup just a little too hard. Her mother was not a woman who liked losing control of a situation, and last night, in front of the entire hall, she had lost control completely. Elira ate her breakfast in silence, waiting for the scolding that always came after any moment where she had somehow embarrassed her mother, even when the embarrassment wasn't her fault. It didn't come, not directly. Instead, her mother simply said, without looking up from her tea, "I hope you understand what you've gotten yourself into." "I didn't get myself into anything," Elira said quietly. "He said it, not me." "Kings say many things," her mother replied. "Whether he means to keep his word is another matter entirely. Don't get comfortable, Elira. Men like him collect interesting things. That doesn't mean they keep them." The words stung more than Elira wanted to admit, mostly because some small, frightened part of her had already been thinking the same thing. She had spent her whole life being told she wasn't worth keeping. It was hard to unlearn that overnight, even with a king's declaration still hanging in the air. She didn't respond. She finished her breakfast and left the room before her mother could say anything else. Cale sent for her 3 days later. The messenger who came to find her was a young wolf named Bren, one of Cale's personal guards, polite and slightly nervous in the way young guards often were when given an important task for the first time. He explained that the king wished to speak with her privately, in the small study near the east wing of the castle, whenever she was ready. Elira almost didn't go. She spent nearly an hour convincing herself that this was some kind of mistake, that Cale had realized his declaration was rash, that he was going to quietly take it back now that the excitement of the moment had faded. Kings changed their minds. People changed their minds about her all the time. It would not have surprised her, but eventually she went, mostly because avoiding it felt worse than facing whatever waited for her. The study was smaller than she expected, warm from a fire crackling in the corner, lined with books that looked well used rather than decorative. Cale stood near the window when she entered, his hands clasped behind his back, and he turned when he heard the door. "You came," he said, sounding almost relieved. "You asked me to." "I wasn't sure you would." "I wasn't sure either," she admitted. He gestured toward a chair near the fire, and after a moment of hesitation, she sat, though she kept her spine straight and her hands folded carefully in her lap, the posture of someone ready to leave quickly if needed. "I want to be clear about something," Cale said, sitting across from her. "What I said in the hall wasn't a performance. I don't say things like that lightly, and I don't take them back once they're said. I know that might be hard to believe, given everything your mother has told you about yourself and about men in general, but I need you to know it's true." "Why?" she asked. "Why me? You don't know anything about me. You saw one bad moment and decided that meant something." "I saw more than one moment," he said. "I've been at 3 of these gatherings over the past 2 years. I noticed you at all 3, standing quietly in the back, doing your job, never once complaining, never once causing trouble, even when I could see exactly how your mother treated you when she thought no one important was watching. I noticed the way you counted things when the room got too loud. I noticed the way you flinched whenever someone raised their voice near you, even when the anger wasn't directed at you. I noticed a lot, Elira. I just didn't say anything until I couldn't stay quiet anymore." She stared at him, unsure what to do with the fact that someone had actually been watching, actually seeing her, for 2 years, without her ever knowing. "That doesn't mean you know me," she said quietly, though some of the sharpness had gone out of her voice. "No," he agreed, "but I'd like the chance to. That's all I'm asking. Not marriage tomorrow, not some grand ceremony you're not ready for, just the chance to know you properly, on your own terms, at whatever pace makes sense to you." It was such a simple request, and yet it felt enormous, mostly because nobody had ever asked her what pace made sense to her before. Her whole life had been dictated by other people's timelines, other people's expectations, other people's plans for what she should be. "And if I say no," she asked. "Then I'll respect that," Cale said without hesitation. "I meant what I said in that hall, Elira. Nobody gets to treat you like you're worth less than you are, not even me, if you decide you don't want this. I'm not interested in forcing anyone into anything. I've seen enough of that in this world to know it never ends well." She studied his face for a long moment, looking for the trick, the hidden motive, the thing her mother always warned her men were secretly hiding. She didn't find it, or if it was there, she couldn't see it yet. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted quietly, the words slipping out before she could stop them. "I don't know how to let someone be kind to me without waiting for the moment it turns into something else." "Then we'll go slow," Cale said simply. "There's no reason to rush any of this." Over the following weeks, something began to shift, slowly, the way ice begins to melt at the edges, long before anyone notices the whole thing is changing shape. Cale did not push her. He sent for her sometimes, simple invitations to walk the castle gardens or share a quiet meal. Nothing grand, nothing that felt like the beginning of some fairy tale wedding plan. He asked about her days. He listened when she spoke, really listened, the kind of listening where a person doesn't immediately start planning what they're going to say next. At first, Elira was cautious with every word, every smile, every small moment of comfort, waiting for the trap to reveal itself. She had learned the hard way that kindness often came with a price, that people who seemed gentle sometimes had the sharpest teeth hidden just beneath the surface. But as the weeks passed, and the trap never came, something in her began to loosen, just slightly, just enough to breathe a little easier when he was near. She told him small things first, that she liked the quiet hours just before dawn, before the castle woke up and filled with noise, that she had once wanted to learn how to read the stars, back when she was young enough to think the future held anything exciting for her, that she counted things, not just wine glasses, but stairs and windows and the number of steps between one room and another, because counting gave her mind somewhere safe to go when everything else felt too loud. He never laughed at these things. He never made her feel small for needing them. Instead, he asked questions, gentle ones, the kind that showed he was actually trying to understand her rather than simply passing time until something more interesting happened. Slowly, she began to tell him bigger things too. She told him about her father, who had died when she was young, the only person in her family who had ever made her feel like she belonged somewhere. She told him, in careful, quiet pieces, about the years after his death, when her mother's coldness had turned into something sharper, something that left marks not always visible on the skin. She didn't tell him everything. Some things still lived too deep to bring into the light, even with someone who had proven, again and again, that he wasn't going to use her pain against her. But she told him enough that he understood why she counted glasses, enough that he understood why kindness made her flinch before it made her feel safe. And he never once made her feel broken for any of it. Not everyone in the castle was pleased with the arrangement. Lady Vantine grew colder as the weeks passed, watching her daughter slip further out of her control with every visit to the king's study, every quiet walk in the gardens, every small laugh Elira allowed herself in his presence. Lady Vantine had spent years shaping her daughter into someone small and quiet and easy to dismiss, someone who would never challenge her, never leave her, never become anything more than a shadow standing behind her mother's ambitions. She had not planned for a king to see something different. There were others too, nobles who whispered behind gloved hands about the strange match, wondering aloud what a king like Cale could possibly want with a girl everyone had written off years ago. Some assumed it was pity. Others assumed it was some strange political move, a way to embarrass Lady Vantine for reasons nobody quite understood. Very few of them considered the simplest explanation, that Cale had simply looked at Elira and seen something worth protecting, something worth knowing, something that had nothing to do with politics or pity at all. Elira heard the whispers, of course. She had spent her whole life hearing whispers about herself, and by now she had built enough walls to let most of them slide off without leaving a mark. Most of them. Some still landed. There was one evening, weeks into their quiet courtship, when a group of visiting nobles, made comments loud enough for her to hear as she passed through the hallway, laughing about how strange it was that a king would choose damaged goods when there were perfectly good options among the unmarried daughters of wealthier families. Elira kept walking, her spine straight, her face carefully blank, the old training taking over automatically. But that night, alone in her room, the old doubts crept back in, quiet and persistent, the way they always did when she let her guard down even slightly. She's too broken to be loved. Her mother's words, still living somewhere in her chest, no matter how many weeks passed, no matter how gentle Cale continued to be. She sat by her window for a long time that night, staring out at the dark hills, wondering if her mother had been right after all, if this whole thing was simply Cale's version of an interesting experiment, something that would eventually grow boring the way most things eventually did. She didn't go to him the next day, or the day after. On the third day he came to find her. He found her in the small garden behind the east wing, sitting on a stone bench, her knees pulled up to her chest, her arms wrapped around them in a posture that made her look smaller than she actually was. "You've been avoiding me," Cale said, sitting down beside her, careful to leave space between them. "I've been busy," she said, though the lie sounded weak even to her own ears. "Elira," she said nothing. "What happened?" he asked, his voice quiet, patient, the same way it always was. She stared at her hands for a long moment before answering. "I heard some nobles talking about why a king would want someone like me. They had theories. None of them were flattering. And you believe them." "I don't know what I believe," she said, her voice cracking slightly despite her best efforts to keep it steady. "I don't know how to trust something good happening to me without waiting for the moment it turns out to be a joke. My whole life, every time something felt safe, it wasn't. Every time someone was kind to me, there was a price attached, even if I didn't see it right away. I don't know how to believe you're any different." Cale was quiet for a long moment, letting her words settle in the space between them. "I can't prove to you in one conversation that I'm different," he finally said. "I don't think words are going to fix years of people teaching you that kindness always comes with a cost. But I can promise you this. I'm not going anywhere just because it got difficult. I'm not going anywhere just because some noble made a cruel comment in a hallway. And I'm certainly not going anywhere just because you had a hard week and needed space. If you need space, I'll give you space. If you need time, I'll give you time. But don't mistake my patience for something that's going to run out the moment you stop being easy to deal with." Elira felt something in her chest loosen slightly, though the old fear didn't disappear entirely. It rarely did, all at once. But it eased, just enough to let her breathe a little easier. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, "for avoiding you." "You don't have to apologize for protecting yourself," he said. "I'd rather you take the time you need than pretend you're fine when you're not." She looked at him then, really looked, the way she had been slowly learning to do over the past weeks, searching his face for any sign of impatience, any sign that her doubts had cost her something in his eyes. She found none. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for not giving up on this." "I wasn't planning to," he said simply. "Not now, not ever." Word of the growing bond between Elira and Cale eventually reached corners of the kingdom beyond the castle walls, as such things always do. Most people who heard the story assumed it would end quickly, that the king's interest would fade once the novelty wore off, that Elira would return to her quiet, forgotten life soon enough. They underestimated both of them. Months passed. The seasons changed. The cold winter that had first brought them together gave way to a slow, careful spring, and with it came a version of Elira that even she barely recognized some mornings when she looked in the mirror. She still counted things when the world felt too loud. She still flinched sometimes at sudden movements, old habits built into her bones by years of learning to expect the worst. But there was something else there now too, something steadier, something that hadn't existed in her before. She had started to believe, just a little, that she wasn't broken, that she had simply survived things that would have broken someone with less strength than she carried, quietly, without ever asking for credit. Her relationship with Cale grew slowly, the way anything built to last usually does. There were quiet mornings spent walking the castle grounds before the rest of the world woke up. Exactly the kind of quiet she had always loved best. There were evenings spent in his study, sometimes talking, sometimes simply sitting together in comfortable silence, which she had learned was its own kind of intimacy, maybe the most important kind. There were difficult days, too. Days when her mother's old words crept back into her mind uninvited. Days when old fears resurfaced without warning. Days when she needed to remind herself, again and again, that this steady, patient man beside her was not going anywhere. Cale never made those days feel like a burden to him. He simply stayed, steady as ever, giving her whatever she needed without ever asking for anything in return. Her mother, for her part, eventually stopped trying to interfere. There was little she could do against a king's declared intentions, and eventually, even Lady Vantian understood that fighting a losing battle only made her look smaller in the eyes of the court. She retreated into cold, distant politeness whenever their paths crossed, which suited Alira just fine. She had spent enough years hoping for her mother's love. She no longer needed it the way she once had. Nearly a year after that first winter gathering, the castle held another celebration, this one much larger, much grander, filled with nobles from every corner of the kingdom. This time, Alira did not stand quietly in the back of the hall holding a tray of wine glasses. This time, she stood beside Cale at the head table, dressed not as a servant, but as someone who belonged exactly where she stood, her spine straight not from old fear, but from something new, something that felt almost like pride. When Cale rose to speak that evening, the entire hall fell silent, the same way it had the night everything changed between them. A year ago, in this very hall, he said, his voice carrying easily across the quiet room, someone stood here and called a remarkable woman broken. I told that room she was mine. Tonight I'd like to correct something I said that night, because I don't think I said it quite right. He turned to look at Alira, and something in his expression made her chest tighten with an emotion she still didn't fully have words for. She was never mine to claim, he said. She was always simply herself, strong enough to survive things most people in this room could never imagine, strong enough to hold herself together in front of 200 people who said nothing while she was torn apart. What I meant to say that night, and what I should have said clearly, is that she deserved better than what this world had given her, and I intend to spend the rest of my life making sure she gets exactly that. The hall was silent for a long moment before it erupted into applause, some of it genuine, some of it simply following the room's lead. But Alira barely noticed the difference. She was looking only at Cale, at the steady warmth in his eyes, at the quiet promise she had slowly learned to trust over the past year. Somewhere in the crowd, her mother sat with her usual composed expression, though even she could not entirely hide the flicker of something uncomfortable crossing her face. Alira noticed it, briefly, and felt nothing but a quiet kind of peace. She no longer needed her mother's approval to know her own worth. She had found that somewhere else entirely, slowly, patiently, in the steady presence of someone who had simply refused to look away. She was not broken. She never had been. She had simply been waiting for someone to notice the difference. And now, finally, someone had.